The movie was Aladdin. The year was 1992, and it was the highest grossing film of the year, earning more than $500 million with a B in box offices worldwide. There was a good reason for this. I mean, behind Aladdin were the big names, right? It was Disney's 31st animated feature film. And it featured the voice talent, which you just heard, of comedian and actor Robin Williams, who was at the absolute height of his career. It also had a great story, all about a young man named Aladdin in the fictional city of Agrabah, who finds a genie with phenomenal cosmic powers and is happy to do just about anything you might ever want. But in the process, Aladdin discovers that in order to have friends and of course get the girl, what he really needs is to be himself and to do the right thing. The last couple of weeks we've been working on a series entitled Friends. And as the title of the series would suggest, we're talking about friendships, right? It's part of an overall theme that we're going to be having for the next 18 months or so about relationships. And we're going to return to it, not just in this series, but several times over the next year and a half or so. But as we do this particular series is crucial because studies have shown that the average friendship, the typical American friendship, lasts less than 7 years. When most of us wish that we had friends that would last a lifetime, right? So let's just be honest. I'm not happy with friends that are only going to be there for 7 years. I want my friends to be there forever and ever and ever, and I want to be their friends forever as well. So our objective is to figure out how to do that, and as part of that, we've got to figure out what sort of people we should allow to speak into our lives. What kind of people do we want to be our friends? But also, we need to figure out what kind of people we need to be good friends for them. That is, what kind of people do we need to be so that we can speak into other people's lives as well? Not just today, not just tomorrow, but indeed over the long haul. Now to do this, we've been examining the people surrounding King David, the people David called friends. 2 weeks ago we saw in 1 Samuel chapter 16 the man named Samuel. He was a prophet and he encouraged David. He risked everything to seek David out, even when Saul, the current king, was breathing down his throat. And when he found David, he encouraged him to leave his sheep that he was tending just outside of Bethlehem and become the next king of Israel. In 1 Samuel 18, we encountered Jonathan. We called him the lover. And he committed himself to David. He loved him so very much that he was willing to give his stuff, his throne, and even his life for his friend. Now, today, we're going to be introduced to a guy named Joab. Joab first appeared in 1 Samuel chapter 26. There he's mentioned as the brother of Abishai and the son of Zeruiah, who just happens to be David's sister. That is, Joab was David's nephew. And as we move into 2 Samuel, following the death of King Saul, Joab showed himself to be a fierce warrior who led David's armies against those who remained loyal to Saul. And he became so fierce, in fact, that although he himself wasn't listed among David's mighty men in 2 Samuel 23, you might remember David had 30-some mighty men. They were the most fiercest, powerfulest warriors that David had in all of his army. And these guys did amazing things. In 2 Samuel 23, we see a list of these mighty men. Joab's name is not on there other than, oh, that's right, there's 3 guys who are identified by their relationship to Joab. In other words, Joab's not considered one of the mighty men. He's the one that the mighty men point to and say, I'm with him. He is in a class all by himself when it comes to being mighty and fierce as a warrior. When it came to warriors in Israel, there was David, then there was Joab, and then there was everybody else. In fact, after David became king, Throughout the book of 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and 1 Chronicles, Joab distinguished himself time and again as the king's right-hand man. When David needed an army built, a city conquered, just about anything done, and anywhere around the kingdom, it was Joab that he had on speed dial to get the job done. And that made sense. I mean, not only was he David's nephew, not only was he a fierce warrior, but Joab was fiercely loyal to his king. In fact, when David's son Absalom, this would be Joab's cousin, remember, Absalom forced David off the throne. He wanted to be king himself, and Joab went with David. Even though Absalom comes in and conquers Jerusalem, and David is forced to flee, Joab goes with David, and later leads an army that comes back, routs Absalom's forces, and restores David to his throne. And when Sheba, son of Bichri, mounted a rebellion against David a few chapters later, it was Joab who sent his men under his brother Abishai's command to put the rebellion down. Over and over and over again, Joab proved his loyalty. Sometimes he even went a little bit far. Okay, sometimes he went way farther than we would probably call appropriate. And there are a couple of times where he gets reined in and called back because he was so zealously loyal to his king. All of that is why what happened in 2 Samuel 24, verses 1 through 10 is such a big deal. In 2 Samuel chapter 24, we have basically what scholars call an epilogue. The word epilogue is made up of two different words from Greek. The first one is epi, which means after, and the second one is log or logos, which means word. Therefore, an epilogue is the little bit that comes after the main part of the story is done. So after the main part of David's story is completely finished, at least as far as Samuel is concerned, someone comes around and adds in a couple of stories to the end. These stories include the list of mighty men in chapter 23, the setup for the construction of the temple at the end of chapter 24, and this particular nugget. Now, all by itself, it's kind of a black mark on David's record. It makes sense then that if you're trying to set up David as the hero king, you kind of skip this kind of a thing. But it was an important little detail. In fact, it was an essential scene because this particular part of David's life, this particular screw-up in David's life, is going to set up the construction of the temple. It's going to make it possible for the temple that would become the center of Israel's life for the next 1,000 years. So we're in 2 Samuel. We're looking at chapter 24. We're going to focus for a moment on verses 1 through 3. If you have a Bible, I'd invite you to open there. 2 Samuel 24, starting in verses 1 through 3. Here's what we discover. The Lord's anger burned against Israel again, and he stirred up David against them to say, "Go, count the people of Israel and Judah." So the king said to Joab, there he is, our hero, our buddy, the commander of his army, "Go through all the tribes of Israel from Dan to Beersheba and register the troops so I can know their number." Joab replied to the king, "May the Lord your God multiply the troops 100 times more than they are, while my lord the king looks on. But why does my lord the king want to do this?" Now, a couple of things right off the bat as we look at these three verses. The first is that we're not exactly sure why God was angry. One of the disadvantages of being in the epilogue here is that this is kind of shoehorned in at the end when it probably happened somewhere earlier in David's life. So we're not exactly sure exactly what preceded this that caused God to be angry with the people. But we kind of have a little bit of an idea because there is a parallel passage in 1 Chronicles. And in 1 Chronicles, we see that it's right before David starts putting together all the pieces of the temple, and it's right after a couple of rebellions have happened. So maybe that's what it is. Maybe God is angry with Israel because so many of them had gone with Absalom and Sheba and rebelled against God's anointed David. I don't know. We'll probably never know the answer until we get to heaven and we can ask it for sure. But that's our best guess for right now. What's important for us, though, is that when God gets angry at Israel, and God is about ready to, kind of go bananas on them for just a minute, David decides this is the perfect moment to count the people. I don't know about you, but it seems to me a little bit counterintuitive. When God is mad, you go count people? Seems to me the better idea would be you get on your knees and pray, right? But no, David's idea is, hey, God doesn't want to hang out with us anymore, so we'll go count the people. Now here's the thing. There's nothing inherently wrong with counting the people. There's nothing wrong with conducting a census. In fact, Israel has done this a number of times in their history by this point. But this one was different somehow. This one was not the same. David ordered Joab to specifically count all of the troops, that is, the men of military age. Because apparently, David was putting his trust in his army, his earthly human strength. And if there's one thing that we see throughout history, it's that when we put our trust in ourselves and our own human strength, God takes exception to that. He doesn't exactly like that, because for some crazy reason, He wants us to trust and rely on Him, right? So when David decides he's going to count his army because he trusts that, look at my army, they're pretty amazing, they're huge, they're strong, they're mighty, they got lots of good toys, we can take on just about anybody we want. And when David gets that kind of an attitude, it was a problem. Compounding that problem, none of David's advisors batted an eye. I mean, here we have the king. Kings surround themselves with people that have good ideas, smart people that know what's supposed to happen, right? That's what a king does, at least in most situations. In this particular case, though, nobody says anything to David. None of them notice that his attitude is a little bit askew. None of them notice that he's wanting to prove that he's strong. None of them have a problem with this at all. They don't even flinch, except Joab. Nobody would challenge this order except Joab. And that's notable because remember, Joab is the loyal guy. He is the one that is so loyal to David, he's willing to kill. He's willing to command armies. He's willing to do just about anything for David. And yet here it is, Joab, the loyal one, who is willing to stand up and say, hold on a second, David. I'm not sure this is a great plan. It's also remarkable that Joab, his record was somewhat less than spotless. This guy has murdered people. This guy has done some very questionable things. In fact, David has had to call him back, rein him in a couple of times and say, hold on a second, man. That's not okay. That's too far. David had to rein in Joab because Joab was going too far. And yet here it is, Joab calling out David, who's supposed to be the one after God's own heart. You see the irony? Most significant, though, is the fact that Joab challenged David on this call. And I think that's where we got to find our first point. Friends, challenge. They don't just take everything we say and cheer us on. They don't just say, yeah, that's great, let's go for it. Friends challenge us when it's appropriate. Friends are the ones who will come to us just like Joab came to David and say, hold on a second, I think that might be a little bit too far. I think that might be off in left field. I think we might be getting away from where we really need to be. I think you're wrong. Now hold on just a second, because if I'm going to be honest, I recognize the contradiction here, right? I mean, just 2 weeks ago, we learned from Samuel that friends encourage. And typically, when we think of encouraging, we think of people saying, yes, go, go, go. I mean, we think of a cheerleader as the one that's encouraging, right? They're on the sidelines saying, do it, do it, do it, go, go, go. And that's what we're supposed to surround ourselves with, right? That's what we saw when David had Samuel hanging around. true. But now we see Joab saying no. It seems like a contradiction, doesn't it? But I want you to remember, encouragement is cheering on the right thing. Encouragement is when you say yes to the right thing. Do it. This is the right thing to do. That's what encouragement is. Joab was saying no here to the wrong thing. David was about to do something that Joab knew was wrong. And so Joab stood up and he said, hold on, flag on the play. No, we can't do this. It's wrong. My friends, it is imperative that we encourage each other to do the right thing, even when that right thing is scary. But it is just as important that we challenge each other to not do the wrong thing. So when we see our friend going the wrong way, doing the wrong thing, we say, hold on just a second, come back over here. We raise our hands and we shout, no. That's what Joab did for David. That's the kind of friend we need to be, and that's the kind of friend we need to surround ourselves with. Now, I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, but those are the kind of friends that I really am not so sure I like so much. Truth is, we'd rather surround ourselves with yes men, wouldn't we? Life is so much easier when all the people around us are always saying yes, 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 you're right, yes, you're awesome, yes, you're the smartest person in the world, yes, do what you want to do. We love those people, don't we? They make us feel real good about ourselves. The problem is, if all we ever have around us is yes people, we find ourselves in a heap of trouble pretty quick, don't we? It's important that we have encouragers like Samuel. But it's just as important, maybe even more important, that we have challengers like Joab who will stand up and say, hold on just a second, you're going the wrong way, doing the wrong thing. No. Friends, challenge. And under the best of circumstances, ideally, when they challenge us, we listen and we don't do the wrong thing. That goes without saying, you would think, right? The only problem is, for David, it didn't. David didn't do that. Joab stands up and says, hold on, king, I'm not sure this is a great plan. We got to think this through a second here. And David's response is, no, go do the census. His order stood. And as we pick up in verse 4, we discover some... Let's just read it together, shall we? 2 Samuel 24, starting in verse 4. Yet the king's order prevailed over Joab and the commanders of the army. David was stubborn. Anybody know somebody stubborn like this? Somebody stands up and says, no, this isn't a great plan, and they say, I'm going to do it anyway. In fact, okay, let's just be honest. Some of us are like 2-year-olds. You say no, and that just exacerbates our desire. You know, it's like pouring gas on the fire, and we want to do it even more because somebody said no. I don't know if that's what's going on here with David, but whatever it is, David's order prevails. David sticks to his guns. He says, no, we're doing the census. I don't care what you say, Joab, do the census. So Joab and the commanders of the army left the king's presence to register the troops of Israel. They crossed the Jordan and camped in Aroer, south of the town in the middle of the valley, and then they proceeded toward Gad and Jazer. They went to Gilead and to the land of the Hittites and continued out to Dan Jaan and around to Sidon. They went to the fortress of Tyre and all the cities of the Hivites and the Canaanites. Afterward, they went to the Negev of Judah at Beersheba. When they had gone through the whole land, they returned to Jerusalem at the end of 9 months and 20 days. How long has it been? 9 months and 20 days. So it's taken them 3/4 of a year to get this job done. Joab gave the king the total of the registration of troops. There were 800,000 fighting men from Israel and 500,000 from Judah for a total of, somebody do the math real quick, 1.3 million people, right? David's conscience troubled him after he had taken a census of the troops. So he said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I've done. Now, Lord, because I've been very foolish, please take away your servant's guilt. Now, so what happened? David stuck to his guns. He's a little bit stubborn. He says, no, we're going to do it anyway. He doesn't listen to Joab. He confirms his order, and Joab and his commanders dutifully go out and take the census. In verses 5 through 7, we see that they started in the south. It's difficult for us because most of us aren't probably familiar with the geography and where all the little towns that they mentioned in those 3 verses come from. But he starts in the south, he works his way to the north, and then to the east. Okay? And as he finally ends up at the north and the east, there are a couple of interesting things that we note in this passage. The first one is that it took them 9 months and 20 days. Now, at least one of the commentators that I consulted as I was preparing to speak with you made note of this and said basically there is no way it should have taken them 9 months and 20 days to do this. It doesn't take 9 months and 20 days to walk this. Why should it take 9 months and 20 days to, count a few people? So this is a little bit outrageous. It takes way too long. A lot more time than it should have. Also interesting is the numbers given here. We've noted them. 800,000 men from Israel, 500,000 from Judah, a total of 1.3 million people. This is significant because there's actually a parallel passage to this. It records the same event in 1 Chronicles chapter 21. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, we learn that the number that was returned was only 1.1 million people. That's a difference of 200,000 people. Now that sounds like a lot of people because it is. And in fact, if you do the math on that, it's something like 19% error rate. I don't know anybody who would be pleased with a census error of 18 or 19%. I know the federal government tries to get it down to within 1 or 2%. And here we have Joab coming in and giving these numbers, and they're so far wacky that nobody can trust them. In fact, in 1 Chronicles 21, we see a note that Joab didn't want to do this census. So he skipped the entire tribes of Levi and Benjamin. And in another reference to this census, in chapter 27 of 1 Chronicles, we discover that the numbers were so wildly inaccurate that they didn't even bother to record them in the official record. That's why we get 2 different numbers in 2 Samuel and in 1 Chronicles. Because they knew that they were wacky. Which makes me wonder what exactly was going on. But before we get to that, I want you to notice that even when David said, no, we're going to do the wrong thing, Joab still stuck around. That's our second point today. Friends, stick around. Friends, stick around. Even when our other friend has done something that we knew wasn't quite right, even when we knew that it was a bad idea going in, now we've seen that they've done the bad idea, they didn't take our advice, and here they are in a whole heap of trouble. Here Joab comes back and he's still with his friend. So when your friend makes a bad decision, stick around. Through the fallout, through the repercussions, through it all. Joab was still there at the end of this bad idea census. And we should be too. In fact, I want you to notice exactly what happens in verse 9 when Joab reports back to his friend. It talks about how Joab comes in and tells him the numbers, and then it just kind of goes on. And it kind of leaves us, I don't know, with a lot of space in between the lines. You ever read between the lines? In this particular case, I think we're supposed to read between the lines. And as I use my imagination to fill in what's in that space, I imagine this report made quite clear that Joab was not happy. Comes in and he says, here's your stupid report, David. I didn't want to do this. It was a bad idea. It took way too long, took way too much time, and I had better things to do. But you wanted to count all the people, so here it is. Probably Joab even told David point blank what he had done. He says, you know what? I didn't like this so much, I cheated. Take that, David. I didn't count anybody in the tribe of Levi, and I totally skipped over the tribe of Benjamin. I know you wanted a number, but this is a stupid census, so I didn't do it. At least I didn't do it all. Ha ha ha, take that one. Good luck counting your people now. And then, I imagine that Joab went one farther. I think he told David exactly what he could do with this census. He says, David, you could take this census, stick it somewhere the sun don't shine. That's exactly what they did. They didn't even record the numbers in the official record. I imagine that's because Joab told him so. Here's the reality. We might not ever know exactly what Joab said. We might not know exactly what Joab did when he returned. Whatever it was, though, take note of what happens in verse 10. It says, David's conscience troubled him. Whatever Joab did when he came back, David knew he was out of line. I imagine it's not a coincidence that Joab comes in and gives the report, and then David's conscience troubled him. Does that make sense to you? You follow me here? David's conscience troubled him, and as a result, he confessed his sin and he repented. And as a result, God forgave him and everything was just wonderful and happy-go-lucky, right? No. This is where this point gets important. This is where this point gets difficult. In verse 11, as we go on from this passage, God gave David three choices. He says, you took this census because you were prideful. You took this census because you trusted in yourself, not in me. You took this census, even though Joab knew this was a bad idea. Why didn't you, the guy who's after my own heart, why didn't you figure out this was a bad idea? God wasn't exactly pleased. He gives David three choices. The choices are these. Number one, 3 years of famine. You understand what a famine is, right? For 3 years, there would be no rain on the land. And in that area, when there's no rain, and it usually comes in specific seasons, but when there's no rain, guess what happens? The crops don't grow. And when the crops don't grow, what do you eat? Nothing. So this is a bad deal, right? 3 years of famine. For 3 years, you will starve. Sound like a great idea? No. Nobody wants this one, right? This is a bad choice. Second choice, number 2, you could have 3 months of retreat. Actually, what God tells David is you can have 3 months where all of your enemies are coming after you and there's nothing you can do to stop them except run. Run away from the Philistines, from the Ammonites, from the Amorites, the Moabites, all the people around you. Run away, David. Can you have 3 months in which you are in unconditional retreat? How do you think David responds to this? Remember, David is the guy that ran toward Goliath. He doesn't have any armor on. All he's got is the sling with 5 stones. And he runs toward the giant wearing armor with sword, spear, shield, all that stuff. David's the kind of guy that runs toward danger. How do you think he responds to this idea of 3 months of retreat? Psst, no way, man. Not doing that one. And then we get choice number 3. Choice number 3 is 3 days of plague. Y'all understand what a plague is, right? Plague is a disease that comes in, infects people, they get sick, and the implication is they die. That's what this one is about. 3 days in which nobody knows how many of your people are going to die. So let's recap real quick. Okay, ready? You got 3 years of famine, starving for 3 years. How many people die out of that? 3 months of retreat, running away from your enemies because they're beating the snot out of you. How many people die out of that? Or 3 days of plague, which is going to kill a bunch of people too. David doesn't have any great choices here, does he? It's kind of like when you got a Band-Aid on your arm. You ever put a Band-Aid on your arm? And When it comes time to pull the thing off, you know that it's going to hurt like crazy because all the hair has somehow grown into the thing and fused with it, and you've got to rip all of that hair out of your arm, and it feels like it's rooted into your nose. Ever had that problem? Or am I the only one that has that much hair on their arm? I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I hate putting Band-Aids on my arm because it always means I'm going to have to pull that Band-Aid off eventually, and there's no good way to do that. So you got three choices when you pull a Band-Aid off. You pull it off slowly and hope that it doesn't hurt but it always hurts, doesn't it? You pull it off kind of medium in the hope that you can kind of moderate between the two, or you pull it off real fast. Get it done with, right? What do you think David's going to choose? He's the guy that charges after Goliath. He's the guy that runs into battle. He's the guy that pulls the Band-Aid off really fast, right? Makes sense, doesn't it? So David chooses 3 days of plague. 3 days of plague. That's what he does. And at the end of those 3 days, Gad the prophet comes to David. He says, David, you need to go. You need to find Araunah the Jebusite. And you need to buy his threshing floor. Now, you might remember, before David came, Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, was under the control of a bunch of people called Jebusites. Now, David managed, with Joab's help, to take over Jerusalem. He's driven out the Jebusites, but there's still Jebusites in the area. And so this guy lives right there near Jerusalem, just outside of town. He's got a threshing floor. And Gad the prophet says, David, you need to go buy that guy's threshing floor, and you need to make offerings there. And so that's exactly what David does. He goes down, he approaches Araunah, and if you can pronounce that one, go for it. It's all you, okay? You're awesome if you can do that. He goes down, he buys this threshing floor, and the guy says, you know what, King, I would give this to you. But David says, no, I'm not going to take it. I've got to pay for this. It's got to be a sacrifice on my part. So he buys it. And in doing so, he just happens to buy a plot of land that would later have a little building put on top of it. And that little building would be on top of a mountain that they built just for it. And it would all be called the Temple Complex. David screwed up big time. There's no getting around that. Joab, his friend, tried to tell him this is a bad idea. And I really can't imagine. I can only try to imagine what might have happened if David had heeded Joab's advice and not done this census. What good things would God have unleashed for him if he had been obedient here? If he had listened. And when Joab challenged, said, okay, you're right. But when he didn't, when he went ahead and did the boneheaded census anyway, Joab stuck with him. He stayed there by his side. And it sucked for a little bit. 3 days of plague, there's no getting around. That sucks, right? How many people died? We don't even know. Dozens? Hundreds? Thousands? How did that affect David's census that he just took? And yet Joab stuck with him through it all. When your friends make bad decisions, stick with them. Don't abandon them. That's the time they need you most. Because the fallout is coming. And whether they like it or not, things are about to hit the fan. And it's going to be a bad deal. They're going to need a friend. They're going to need somebody to help them get back up on their feet and keep moving forward. It's a good thing that David had Joab. Because with Joab by his side, David was able to pull it together. He was able to buy a little threshing floor. And that threshing floor later became the center of God's presence on earth. You see what happened? Joab stuck with David, and because he did, they were able together to redeem a terrible situation and bring something good out of it for everyone. Friends, stick around. We can't forget that. We've got to do it. It's a lot easier said than done, I understand. But our friends are going to need us, and we're going to need them. Because sooner or later, we're going to make a mistake. We're going to do something stupid. And it's in those moments that friends really prove their worth, because they help us pull through it and come out on the other side okay. Will you be the kind of friend that Joab was? The kind that says, hold on a second, no, this is a bad idea. The kind of friend that sticks around even when you do something boneheaded. Will you be a challenger?